Hi, my name is Jacob Perkins. I'm here today to talk to you about the privatization of Virginia public utilities. Now, earlier this year, Texas lost power for 17 days. 17 days where everybody was questioning, how do I keep my kids warm? How do I feed my kids? How do I send them to school? How do I go to work without power? Now, the issue with the United States today is without electricity, you can't do any of that really. Now, the issue in Texas is the same issue shared by Virginia and by the large majority of the United States, and it's that their power grid is privatized. That means it's a government asset that's been contracted out to a private company. Now, this is almost a good thing. The government has to spend less money, which means you are taxed less. In fact, they now have a new tax input from this private owned company. However, that privately owned company is a for profit, meaning they're going to now do as little work as possible to take as much of your money as possible. This is what caused the failure in Texas. They did as little maintenance as possible throughout the grid's lifetime, even though the population expanded. Same issue in Virginia. Our population is expanding. The load on the grid is becoming greater. And then, as soon as this environmental catastrophe hit Texas, that was the straw that broke the camel's back. It was too much for the grid. And so the grid failed for 17 days. Can Virginia take those 17 days? Would it be 17 days or would it be more? And is that risk we want to take? Now, the issue with these privatized companies is, like I said, they are for profit. They're going to do as little work as they have to. And in Virginia, in fact, we have about three companies. One of them, namely, is Dominion Energy. Now, Dominion Energy owns a third of the grid. They do not share a third of the grid, they own a third of the grid. Meaning, if you live in Dominion Energy's third, they're the only company you can get power from. Can't get power from one of the other two, it's only Dominion. And these contracts that these companies have last anywhere from a year to decades. That's decades where Dominion Power literally has a monopoly over you. Because your only other options are solar panels or generators, which cost effectively are more expensive than living on the power grid. Now, this is the issue because, as I said, they effectively have a monopoly over you. A monopoly where their sole goal is to make as much money as possible. So they're going to do as little work as possible. That's why we get so many power outages. Sure, they may fix them fairly quickly, but earlier in this grid's lifetime, when there was less of a load on the grid, when the grid was newer, we had little to no power outages. As it got older was when it started to fail. And the issue is, furthermore, not only do they get to basically charge you whatever they want, I mean, they can be expensive, but they can be classist too. Because let's say you're living in an area that didn't used to have the power grid. If you are a low income area or income with a small population, they are most likely not going to expand into your area because you're not worth it to them. You're not enough money. Again, that makes it classist. So we've got a fragile, expensive, and a classist power grid. This expands to all utilities, from internet to power to the water system. And the issue is it's all privatized in Virginia. Namely, like Cox and Verizon for internet. We have Dominion Power for electricity. We have, pretty sure it's just called the water company for water. Now, the way to fix this, oddly enough, is to go farther in. We would want to privatize all of our industries because if it's government owned, that industry, that utility is slowly going to get older and more expensive and crippled by the government because the government can't afford to spend more money on it because we innately want to spend as little money on our taxes as possible. We won't realize that issue until, our power grid is crippled. That's why things get privatized in the first place. Things get old. The government can't afford it, so they sell it to someone else. Now, if we completely privatize everything, we can artificially actually create competition. And that's what many experts actually propose. Instead, like, say, the Cato Institute, Chris Edwards, he proposes that by us privatizing everything, we are able to not only create government revenue from the initial sell off, but we create taxable revenue. And on top of that, if we instead create several small contracts that last only a year, that creates artificial competition. If you are bad at your job, if we don't like how you did when we first gave you the contract, we are not going to give you a new contract. We will give your contract away. That creates competition. You're going to have lower rates. You're going to do a better job. And that's going to make people happier. You will keep your contract if you do that. And so that's what many experts agree on, is that we need a way to create competition. And most of them say the biggest way to do that is to have several people own the power grid instead of one central mass. The government shouldn't own it all. These companies shouldn't own huge sections of it. And if we do that, then we'll have a higher quality, a cheaper power grid. We'll have cheaper utilities. Places like Japan, where they have already done things like this, their internet is way faster than ours because they have several small companies all competing among each other. That is proof that this works. And if we do that, we no longer have to worry about losing power. We no longer have to worry about being cold, about whether we can cook for our kids. Because I don't know about you, but if nowhere has power, how are you going to eat? You can't go to McDonald's. You can't cook food. What are you going to do? You are going to literally be resorting to serving your kid cold SpaghettiOs out of a can for 17 days. Can you survive 17 days?